demos and stuff we do and put them on YouTube if you ever want to go back for a reference later.
We have a
Post
channel.
YouTube channel.
We'll post the one from last week shortly.
In the general channel and stuff like that. So first thing today is we are going to be kind of taking a logo that we designed in Illustrator, move it over into Photoshop, kind of design this lower third, and then port it all into Premiere and kind of layer it all together and be like, look, we made a brand new show. Now, generally in the industry, you probably wouldn't go through this workflow. You would probably stay with either just Illustrator or just Photoshop and then move it into Premiere. But just to kind of give you guys an example of some of the different tools that are in both of those, we wanted to try to kind of bridge the gap. Now, there's a big difference between Illustrator and Photoshop. Does anyone know what the main difference is?
Photoshop works with raster images, so it's pixel-based, and you can't really distort an image. Whereas Illustrator works in vector, so you can scale an image and not lose depth or quality of that image.
Exactly. So there's vector graphics and there's raster graphics. Vector graphics are where everything is represented with mathematical expressions so that you can scale it to any size and the resolution is independent. You can change it to whatever size and there's no pixelation. When you have a raster graphic, like something that's a photograph, there's certain pixels, and if you try to blow that up, you're going to see that there's some pixels and it becomes quite ugly to look at. So generally, whenever you're creating a logo, you're going to be making it in a vector-based program.
I'm sorry, I missed what. So the raster is where it becomes like an actual pixelated photograph that doesn't even scale as you beef it up. And what's the other one called?
Vector.
Vector. Okay.
So basically it uses like math and stuff like that to like keep track of curves and lines and things like that so we can scale and not lose that quality.
All right, that makes sense. Cool.
Yeah, and we'll show you guys examples as we go. So right now I have Illustrator open. Illustrator is a vector-based tool made by Adobe. And basically what we will do is we will start off by creating a new project. So if everybody's got Illustrator open, we'll go to File, New Project. Generally when you're creating a logo, I usually work with a square canvas to begin with. So I typed in here 1024 by 1024 just to give myself enough space to work with that's also square. Do let me know if I'm going too fast. So, welcome to Illustrator. Illustrator has a whole lot of tools all here on the left side. We've got a bunch of stuff to play with. Mainly, you've got your squares and the ability to create graphics with it. You've got these tools, your shape tools. There's plenty more within there.
So if you click and hold on one of those icons on the left side, it'll open up a menu with related similar tools.
Mm-hmm. So rectangle tool, we've got the ellipse tool, so you can make circles. There's also the key combinations. So if I try to make an ellipse, it's not very much like a circle, but if I hold the Shift key, it'll snap into position as a circle. If I hold the Option key, it'll grow from the point that I had started from. So you have these other options for changing your shapes and kind of making them pixel perfect otherwise. You can also use the space bar and then drag it around. So there's different combinations, and we can explore those if people are curious about them. But those are the ones that I know of. Do you know if there's another one?
I think those are like the basic ones we use the most.
Okay. You can also just click in one spot and you can describe the size of the graphic you want to make. But the thing that I want to show you guys most importantly is if I go to the magnifying tool and I zoom in to the canvas here, you'll notice that as I get closer, there are no pixels to this shape. I can get as close as I want, or as far away as I want, and it will be pixel perfect the whole way. There's no pixels to it, and that's because it is a vector-based program. Go. So if we wanted to make a logo, David and I were talking about creating a new show. We want to call it Space Talk. So we were thinking of making a show about space things, and we needed to create a logo for this new show. So the first thing that comes to mind when I think of space is a rocket ship. So I'm going to try to build a rocket ship with some of these primitive shapes here. I like the shape of this right now, so I may take this piece and we'll start working with it. So within Illustrator, I'm just clicking on a shape and then deleting it. So I'll go to my selection tool, I'll click on a shape, and I'll hit delete to make it go away. And here is my base of my rocket ship. So if I go to Align to Artboard, I'll just center it here real quick. There's these centering tools. I can change the alignment. I'm going to grab from my window which one am I? Pathfinder. Pathfinder is an awesome tool within Illustrator that allows me to kind of combine these different shapes together and make them into other things. So for example, if I take this ellipse and put a square on top of it, I can then select, I can then go back to my selection tool and select both of these shapes, and I can use this minus front or subtraction tool, and I'll create a new shape that is just the shape without that space anymore. Of course, there's other ways to combine these, so if I undo real quick, I can also put them both together, so now they're not two separate shapes, they're one shape. I can also divide them, so now they are three shapes. There's this middle one here. And I can just delete that piece and create some interesting shapes out of that. So we've got a rocket ship, but we're going to want to do something fun with this rocket ship, like cut off its base so that we can put kind of a thruster on the bottom, right? So I'll take that, and I'll take my selection tool, and I'll select both of these, and I'll subtract them. So now I have more of that rocket shape. Now, every rocket that I know has fins, so I'm going to make those as well. So
Fins
I
is
will,
the official term.
yeah, they're like fish. They have fins. So I'll take a circle, and I'll take a second circle, and I'll kind of put them on top of each other, more or less. And I'm not sure if anyone else is seeing what I'm trying to do, but I'm going to take this one, and I'll take this one. I'll align them first so that they're so that they match each other, and then I'll subtract the top circle from the bottom one, and we can put this on our rocket. And so now we're getting ourselves a little rocket ship. How's that looking?
What were those white lines?
Those white lines were part of our shape. So in every one of these shapes that I've been making, they have what's called a stroke to them. I can increase that stroke, and that stroke is just the path itself. So every one of these shapes is defined by a mathematical expression that is the path. And those paths, you can make a stroke on them, or you can fill them with a color. So all of these have a black fill and a white stroke, and the stroke is a width of 1 point. And for what I'm working on right now, I actually don't need the strokes at all. It's just what was default, and I was working on top of that. Am I going too fast for anyone? Cool. So we will take our two shapes, and we will combine them together, and we've got a pretty rockin' rocket ship. That was a pun. You guys were supposed to laugh, but that's okay. The next step is I'm going to put a little window on our little rocket ship. And this time, instead of doing it the other way, now I've got my rocket ship with a window. Cool. The next step that I was going to show you, well, this rocket looks great, but there are other people who make rockets that look a whole lot better. So I'm going to show you guys this tool that I often go to. It's called thenounproject.com. Who has not heard of the Noun Project? So the Noun Project is a great resource of Creative Commons icons. So we could search for anything that we want, like farm, because maybe we want some like abducted cows or plants or something. We can toss them in. But all of these icons are free, open source, Creative Commons, and you're able to use them and edit them within Illustrator because they're all vector based. So if you ever go online, you're like, oh, I need this like camera for this logo that I'm building. You can actually find them here on the Noun Project and save yourself the work of actually putting it together. So I'm going to look up rocket ship. And I'm going to look for one that I like. It's got like that kind of black body and isn't too many outlines or strokes. Maybe this one will do. Now you'll need an account in order to download stuff, so I've already logged in to save ourselves that extra time. But you have two options. You have a PNG and an SVG. Anyone know the difference? Go for it, David.
All right, PNG is a type of raster file. So if you were to save this image, it would have a certain width and height, and it would be a raster image. SVG is a type of vector file format, so it would be all math-based and scalable.
Exactly. PNG, one of the benefits of PNG versus JPEG, I'm sure you guys have heard of a JPEG before. JPEGs do not have a transparency pixel, or a value for holding a transparent point. PNGs do, so you can actually save transparency or create an interesting shape at a specific scale and then save it that way. So we're going to get ourselves an SVG because in case we do need to scale it, and since we are making
PNG and tracing.
right? Yeah, okay, good point. We can do it that way too.
Yeah.
So David reminded me, we could also do a PNG and use it in Illustrator and show you guys a pretty awesome tool that comes with Illustrator. So I'll go with PNG today. We'll get it from the Creative Commons, and we'll get a new file here.
Can you do both so we can see the difference?
Yeah, we can do both. So I'll go to re-download, and I'll go for SVG. And so now I've got both of these files, if you can see them, but they are both here. So I'm going to move them into the working folder that I'm in right now, so I'll move them both into this assets folder. And there they are. Now, I will put them into Illustrator, and Illustrator will be like, okay, here's your two projects. So we've got one that's a PNG right here. I'm going to close that. And then there's also this one, which is an SVG. Now if I zoom in, you can see, once again, this is all defined mathematically with a series of points. Each one of these little points are defining a different characteristic of the line, and it goes on from there. Whereas if I go into our friend the PNG, notice the difference. Gross, right? So let's see what Illustrator can do for us. Go back the other way. There's this awesome tool within Illustrator called Image Trace. Image Trace allows you to take any kind of JPEG or raster graphic and convert it into vector-based. Now, of course, these are making predictions, and it's not always perfectly accurate, but it's going to try its best to guess how to represent these pixels as a mathematical expression. So I can hit expand on that. And you can see it kind of guessed where these shapes were. You can see the nose, the rocket's a little bit off. You've got a lot of text points for all the different text that was in there. So we're going to select this and all the different pieces of it, and we're going to get rid of some of these extra pieces because we don't need these things. Now I knew that that circle was going to be an extra piece. If you wanted to see for more clearly that it was something, you can show transparency grid. So you can see I've gotten rid of all the white now. Now it's just the black image. So now that I've got my vector, I'll copy that, and I'll paste it here. Now, which rocket do you like better?
I like the demo rocket, to be honest.
The newer one? Yeah, I like this one too. So I'm going to say goodbye to this guy, and we'll use this guy instead.
He liked yours.
He likes yours.
Oh.
Double run.
All right, so we've got two different rockets to work with. I guess at this point, it's we could kind of start building the rest of the logo, right? We've got a rocket, but it doesn't really say anything about what this show is called. So I'm going to grab some text, and we'll start from there. That's really tiny text, but we're going to call it Space, and we're going to call it Talk, because we're making a show called Space Talk. I'll take these two, and I can go up into the size, and I can change its size to something a little bit bigger. Maybe 44 would be plenty. And I'll actually change the font as well to Futura. And we'll do Futura bold. All right, 54. I like that. So here's Space Talk. Once again, every one of the glyphs in a font are also vector-based. So when you're working in Word or anything like that, you could actually scale those up to whatever size you want. They're also all vector-based. So I can zoom in here, and we can see it's still vector-based. So let's take our rocket ship, and let's design the rest of the logo. So I'll scale it up a little bit so that it's got a little bit more weight in the scene here. I'll also take one of these shape tools, the polygon tool specifically, and I'm going to go with an 8-sided figure. Is that 8? That looks like 8.
How do you add points to that?
I use the arrow keys to increase or decrease the number of points with the polygon tool. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm looking for an 8-sided shape because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a little star out of it. So what I'll do is then I'll use my direct selection tool so that I can select individual points on the shape, and I'll select every other point. Nope, I missed that one. And I should be able to drag these in towards it. Okay. Well, in this case, I'm just going to take each of these and I'm not going to move them in like I was supposed to. And I don't really care where they are in the middle of this shape more than I'm. Oh, I made a duplicate of the whole thing, didn't I? Okay, we're gonna try this one more time. I made a mess. I'm sorry. Let's try this one again. So here we go. Brand new shape. We're gonna select the points that I'm moving here, and I'm just gonna move them in. This way, what I can do, because there's some cool effects that come with these shapes. You'll see this little widget on the side, and I will take each of those points and their widgets, and I'll stretch it out so that now I get this little star shape. Do what again?
Just what you got.
Yeah, so I've got each of these points.
Yeah.
Then I will select the points that I've gotten there, and there's this little widget.
Oh, so that.
And as I pull it out, it'll create kind of a radius between the 2 points up until the point that it can't go any further. And now I get this kind of a burst of a star. So I'll use this burst, and I'll change its color so it'll be in negative to the rocket ship and kind of give it a bit of a sparkle. So I'll take this, and I'll overlay it on the rocket ship. It's much bigger than the rocket ship right now, so we'll change that shape just a tad to kind of give it some like. Something like that. We also could use the line tool and create some arcs so that it looks like the rocket has some motion to it. So I'll create an arc that I like, something like that. This one, since it's just a path and it doesn't have a shape, I'll just use the stroke. So I'll increase my stroke, make it black, make it a couple points bigger. And then what I'll do is I'll take the uniform, or the variable width profile, and I can change that to be something like this. So now it'll taper off on both ends of the shape. Now I can take this and I can, it's going, it's pointing the wrong way, so I'll turn it around. And so it's kind of pointing the way that I want it to. And I'll copy it, and I'll paste it, and I'll move it over. So now we get this kind of rocket. Getting along? This making sense? Cool. I also want to put the moon in this scene just to give us some other thing to ground the shape. And so I'll create a circle. Go something like that. It'll be a little bit off center. Now I don't want a stroke on this. I just want it to be straight white. So I'll take the stroke off and I'll put white on it instead. And then I will go to Object, Arrange, and then send it back. So it's all the way on the bottom. So now I kind of got my shapes and pieces. Maybe it would help if I could see the transparency. So I'll turn on the transparency grid, and we'll get rid of this rocket ship, and we've got all of these different pieces. So now it's just a matter of kind of scaling things, because that's always been my problem, is I can't get the scale right, but at least the design's coming together. So let's take our rocket ship and its little black thing. We'll go here. Kind of match the size of the circle a little bit. don't want to see through the window the other part of the circle, so I'll do it like that. And these things will come down. And we'll go like that. And then the space talk is far too small, so we'll make that a lot bigger too. So what do you think?
That's a logo.
Amazing.
Looks like a logo to me.
I forget what space talk is.
Yeah, Space Talk is the name of the
made
show.
up imaginary show that we are doing
Gotcha.
full time for the rest of us. No, just for this.
So what I'll do is I'll select everything. We'll then group it all together. And to group, you just do Command G. I don't remember which menu it is, and I don't want to go searching for it. So we've got that, and then I'll center it within the artboard. Cool.
So that rocket ship icon on the top, is that indicated for shape brought in before? Or
That's
is
just
that just completely unrelated?
that's a nice
It's a
It's
very
great.
great question. So that changes which processor you're using on the machine. If you have dual
Yeah, to go
processors
with the
or if
space
you're using a GPU, you can actually change how things are displayed in Illustrator. Now we can also go a lot deeper into Illustrator. There's a whole lot more tools and other functions that we can play with. But for this example, does that kind of give everybody kind of an overview of the difference between at least what vector looks like and how we can scale it and work with it? Cool. So now I'm going to turn it over to our friend David, and he's going to work on creating the lower third for the rest of this project. So I'm going to save this as logo,
Sure.
or maybe we can call it Space Talk logo.
Better.
And I can close these other nouns because we don't need them anymore. Don't save and close that noun. Cool.
Okay.
After you, sir.
So for the next part of this, we're going to bring it into Photoshop in order to create our lower third. One of the reasons we're able to do this in Photoshop is because we know that if we're going to be creating this for video content, we know what our aspect ratio of the project is going to be. We're pretty much generally going to work in 1920 by 1080. So since it's a fixed size, we don't really have to worry about things scaling super well. And Photoshop just gives you like different sort of control over just different aspects of making your graphics. So, wait, did you save this out? You did?
Yeah, I did.
All right.
Yep, it's saved in assets.
So let's go over to Photoshop, and we'll make a new.
So we're done with Illustrator?
Yeah, we're done with Illustrator.
Yep. All right. So we said we were going to do that. We were going to be making just a standard HD video project, 1920 by 1080.
Notice that he's also working in pixels.
Yep. So working in pixels, you can set it by inches or whatever other kind of stuff you would want, but generally pixels is kind of the go-to. So we see here RGB color, and RGB stands for red, green, blue, not red, green, green. It's not the same. In some places, you might see something called RGBA, and so what the A is the alpha channel of color. That's what allows transparency. So the red, green, and blue channels are a number between 0 and 255. They basically represent like the values of each of the colors that make it up. So what you're looking at, and then the fourth value that we added into that for alpha is just the transparency of it on a scale from 0 to 1 usually. Okay, so we're going to make our 1920 by 1080 project. 72 pixels per inch is a standard resolution. Some people go higher for super high quality things, but we don't really need that right now.
Yeah, if you're going to do print, generally you're using 300 pixels per inch. For most screen graphics, it's all 72.
Okay, just something.
That looks like it.
Cool. So we can bring this into our project. All right. So since we're going to be working at scale for how we're actually seeing what this would look like on screen, we just want to shrink this down and position it off to the lower left-hand side, where we would start our lower third from. So we were thinking that we don't want people ripping off our quality content of talking about space from our YouTube series or whatever this is going to be. So we're going to basically make a watermark that we're going to show over our video at all times. Then we're going to use that in conjunction with the lower third as a way to just kind of discreetly, like smoothly bring it in. So let's just position this where we want it.
Now, how do we know that it's within like the bounding box, or like that it'll show on all the different screens that this will come in? You know, like aren't there like a safe guideline or something?
Yeah, so you can have rules that you bring in, which are basically like or guides, which are basically like little things you can bring onto the screen to align things, show you where title safe is, show you where action safe is.
Does anyone know the difference between title and action safe? Go for it, Nico.
Title and action safe. We showed it last time. If you guys read the last one, it's
I
basically
never used these.
that is this rectangle within the rectangle, and it shows you where titles can be and where that they won't be cut off on those screens. Because while every screen is a different size, they all follow the same proportions. So if you're putting a lower third on it, if you're within like a certain percentage of the distance away from that, you're guaranteed to have that within any television or any kind of screen. So it gives you this.
Reset, I guess.
So, which one's which? Title safe is the interior.
Yeah.
Title safe is the interior.
Action safe is the exterior rectangle.
Yep.
So staying within that and aligning, it's just like the rule of thirds. It's just like that, pretty much. Just applies to titles.
Just some people who did a lot more research than we did, who know what looks aesthetically pleasing.
And what will generally show up, right?
Okay.
Space Dog!
First of all, we have this white background, so we can't really see where our circle is. So I'm just going to click the little eyeball over on my layers here to hide that, but I have to unlock it
Free
first.
transform.
I have to put this down. There, I can hide that. Okay. So now we have our logo selected. So we see in the layers over here, there's this little icon over the preview, the thumbnail of our layer. And that indicates that it's a smart object in Photoshop. Smart objects are basically just like their way of handling vector files. So since we want to be working with this at a pixel level eventually, we could scale it down to where we want, first of all.
Command T.
Thank you. We want to make sure that is inside of title safe. Absolutely. Well, I guess a watermark is a little bit for the title. All right, and then we need to put something basically extending out from our logo that's going to be the background for the text, so that you don't have text displaying over whatever your video image is. Because say you were to have white text for your title and the video that it's being displayed over is like a bunch of different colors, it can make it hard to read. So we're just going to put the little background there for the lower third. So going with the space theme, I figured we could use a background of like a starry night sky. So we have in Chrome, we just found a random image of a starry sky. So we're going to take this and save, save image as stars.
PP. Or no, there's assets in that list. Yeah. Today's demo. Yep.
All right. Save that there. We can go back to Photoshop and bring in our stars. Okay, so this is a lot bigger than what I'm going to need for just this little background thing here. And also, we want our Starry Night background to be below the logo so that we can see the entirety of the logo. So first, we're going to take this image over in the Layers panel here and move it below our logo. That's just the same thing we were doing when we sent the positioning to the back in Illustrator. It just like arranges things in front of or behind each other within the workspace. And then, since we want to be working with this at a pixel level, we're going to select this layer with the Smart Object designation. We're going to right-click on it and say Rasterize Layer. So that's now turned this into a raster graphic. And so if we were to scale this up, we would start to see some pixelation and things like that. But we only want this one little section of it right over here. So we're going to use one of these tools over here. This is the rectangular marquee tool. This basically just lets you select an area of the page. So in Photoshop, when you see these little dashed lines moving around, that's called a selection. So when you're working with raster images, you can select parts of the images to edit them. So if I were to hit V to go back to my selection tool and move this now.
Smart object as well. You gotta rasterize it.
I already did it.
Oh, there's no pixel selected.
That ain't true. All right. So you can Command D to deselect.
You're in the wrong layer.
Yeah.
That's why I am on the wrong layer. I rasterized the wrong
Yeah.
layer. So we'll rasterize our stars. We'll make a selection just of something random. So if we hit V to go back to the selection tool and move this now, kind of basically just selected those pixels, and it doesn't treat it as part of a whole image. Before we saw work in Illustrator how shapes were basically worked with as entire images. Selections in Photoshop are a little different. So we can undo that because we don't want to take that random thing. But we are going to take this section of stars right down here, which is where we're going to be displaying our titles over. So we'll make this selection, and then I'm going to separate this from the rest of the image. There's multiple ways you can do that because there's multiple ways you can do basically everything in the Adobe programs. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer by copy. So what that does is, over in our layers panel, we'll see a new layer appear with the old image untouched, unaffected, and the new layer containing just what happened from our selection. So we can do that by going up to Layer, New Layer via Copy, or Command J is the shortcut for that. Why did that not do it? Okay, it did it. Command J did it. So if we hide our original one now, we see we have a new layer with just the part that we had selected from there. So I'm just going to rename this layer right here to title bar, whatever makes sense for you. And then I'm going to just sort of reposition it a little bit in order to give us enough space to put text in there. It's distorting the image a little bit when you do this, but with something like a Starry Night background, distortion doesn't really matter that much. If you're working with like a photo that needs that has people in it or something like that, that's going to look noticeably weird if you distort it. You might not want to mess with it in that way. All right, and so now this sort of works. It sort of doesn't look great. So one thing we can do is use the eraser tool to kind of give the edges of this a soft fall off instead of a hard edge, and that might just help it blend in to look a little better. So with the eraser tool and with the brush tool, these work similarly. So I'll show you the brush tool first, actually. You can hit B for the brush tool, and this basically just takes whatever color you have selected and works as a paintbrush as you click and drag. So you see this has a very soft edge here. So that's a property of a brush called hardness. You can go up into your top bar here, select this drop down for the brush, and it gives you options for the size of the brush, the hardness, where 100 is just a hard line, 0 is going to be a very soft line. And then some different preset brushes down here. You can also create your own brushes in Photoshop, but we'll not be doing that today. So an eraser would work the same way. If I have 100% hardness selected, and there's increase my size of it here, you see that it creates a hard line as it erases. If I were to turn my hardness off, it would be a very soft erasing. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to softly erase, but first delete all this. Okay, so we're going to take our eraser. The shortcut for that is E. We're going to bring the size down because we don't want it to be a super hard follow, or super soft follow, sorry. So we'll make it, say, 15 pixels with 0 hardness. And now we can start erasing. And if I just try to erase, it's very tough to draw a straight line. So a very helpful tip is to hold the Shift key when you're trying to make straight lines. Basically click wherever you want to start, hold the Shift key, and you can move in whichever direction, and it will lock it to an axis. So this is locked to the x-axis here. And now we can see that there's kind of a soft fall off to this. I might actually want a little more fall off. That's a little tough to see. Let's make it 25 and do the same thing.
So this would be for like a banner or something?
So this would be for like a lower third. So we have some video we recorded. It's just like me talking. So say we were to introduce me for the first time in this video, I would want to say my name, my title, or important
So you
information.
would put Dave there.
Yeah, so I would put text right over this. So this is starting to look a little bit better here. I might want to see how it would actually look if I were to have text on this, just to make sure that it works out and is all right. So I'm going to go to our text tool right here, and just as a little like testing for myself, I'm going to write in my name, David.
Yeah, that is hard to
Dorsey.
see.
I'll turn it white and make it bigger. Woohoo! go back to view my selection tool in order to move this around. And if you don't see this box around what we have selected with like the arrows to drag things, you can do Command T to show or hide transform controls. We can move it around using the arrow keys. It moves it by a tiny bit each time. You can also hold Shift while you use the arrow keys to move it by a larger amount each time. So that's just helpful for positioning things. So we can see this is still a little bit small. And then say we were to give me a subtitle, because that's very common. With lower thirds, it's you give people their name and a subtitle. So Space Expert is my official job title. It's on LinkedIn. All right. And then we're just going to align this.
David, how do you change the font?
So when you have some text already written on the page and you want to change the font style of that, you can hit T to go back to the text tool and just click on any text that's on a layer that isn't locked, and it'll go back into editing that text. You can then select it all and choose from any of the fonts up in this top menu here. You can also change characteristics of it using some panels over here. So they're hidden right now, but I can bring up the paragraph window. It's just a little panel over here which gives you things like left aligned, right aligned, centered, whatever, things like that. And then the character one has helpful stuff like kerning and leading, text stretch in either direction, things like italics and superscript and all that fun stuff over here. So these two windows are helpful when working with text in Photoshop. Yep.
Is there any way that you can like round out the edges, like on like the star strip?
Yeah, we can do that. So there's a few ways we could go about doing that. I'll show you a way that we haven't done yet. So we can use the pen tool over here in order to make a selection. And the pen tool works with Bezier curves. Has anybody seen Bezier curves before? Are you familiar with them at all?
Pierre Bezier?
Yeah, Pierre Bezier is the guy who came up with them. So basically, Bezier curves work with points and handles are the two things that are used to create lines. So you can click to create a point. You can click and drag to create a point with handles. And the length and size of the handles determines the shape and size of the arc, how far it stretches in either direction, and all that fun stuff. So once I make a selection with my pen tool, I can go up to this top window, say make selection. It gives me an option to kind of feather it off, which is what we see with like that gradient fall off kind of. And then we can make our selection. So if I deselect this, go back down to the bottom, and maybe just cut off a little bit more of what we were doing here to make it a nice even shape. I could make points right around the corner and then use handles to sort of fall that off.
And if you want to learn more about Bezier curves, there's actually a whole web program called the Bezier game, and you like go through like levels to try to make shapes with these points. It's actually really fun.
You're pretty good at it after a while.
Yeah.
I played it for like 2 hours.
Okay, so now that I have this sort of rounded selection, we could do like the same thing we did before basically, and Command J to make a new layer via copy. Oh, no.
You're on the text.
Oh, I'm on the text layer. Keep doing that. Make sure you're working on the right layer in this program and in every program.
Yeah.
Would auto select help you with that?
What's that?
Would auto select have helped you with that?
Only if you had clicked that layer to begin with. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to go down to my title bar. I'm going to Command J to make a new version of that. And now we have our one with some sort of rounded off edges here. The feathering was a little bit too high, so I might want to go back and tone that down actually. So in Photoshop, here's a little interesting thing. So if you do Command Z for undo twice in a row, it'll actually just toggle back and forth between the step that you just undid. There's a different system called step forward and step backward, which is pretty similar to what we are used to when we have undo behavior. So instead of Command Z, it's Command Option Z. It's also up in this edit menu here, I believe.
Yeah. Step backward is the top option now.
Yeah. And so step backward will basically just let us go back multiple times in order to undo as much as we want. There's also step forward, which is, I believe, Command Shift Z. Yeah. Which is basically like the redo that people are used to seeing. So we're going to make that selection again with a little less read. feather top.
David, is there a way to see my history more than just like one or two things?
There is a way to see your history. So up in the top bar on the right side here, we have our history, and it'll basically go through the actions that you've taken to show you what you've done. You can go back through these to kind of edit your workflow as well. All right, so now that we have that selection made, we're going to do the new layer via copy again, Command J. And that's a little closer to what we were looking for. It's got the rounded edges with the soft fall off. It's a little too thin at this point, so I might go in and just increase the size of this a little bit and move it over because it's overflowing. All right, so now our lower third is starting to come together here. A lot of what you see with lower thirds or like graphics and anything like that, once you get used to the tools in Photoshop, there's a lot more you can always learn about graphic design to make things look better. The tools as they exist are, they're pretty, like once you get used to them, they're standard enough, like not super complex, and it's more so a lot of times learning about principles of graphic design and things like that in order to make things look super cool and flashy. So this isn't the best looking graphic we've ever made here, but it gets the job done for today. So our text was here just as an example. We can see that we can actually go a little bigger than that now if we want. So I'll just turn these text layers off after I hit enter to commit it. So now we have our lower third right here. So we said we were going to use the watermark on our video in addition to this. The reason we wanted to do that is kind of just a smooth way of like bringing up the lower third because we're not doing any motion graphics today. A lot of times lower thirds use motion graphics, but we'll cover that kind of stuff later in the semester. So I'm going to save out two versions of this. One is going to have this title bar for displaying the text, and then one's not going to have it, so that we can just have the watermark. Saving the two of them out from Photoshop at the same time in the same size document just makes it easier so that I don't have to like line them up in Premiere later. They're just going to both be ready to go. So I'm going to save out these images now by going up to File, Save As, and then we can choose our format. We're going to go with a PNG. The reason that we're doing a PNG here is because we have these soft edges, which is due to the alpha channel that I was talking about before. So there's some transparency to it. And as Jeremy mentioned, PNGs support transparency, JPEGs don't. So it's always a good thing to keep in mind is the right type of file that you want for whatever you're exporting. We're doing PNG. We'll call it ST lower third.
Something else I'll mention is that you can use PNGs, but you can also use GIFs. The GIF file type actually does have transparency. It's just, it has a much lower bit size, so you can't have as many different colors.
There were some PNG options there, but usually the standard is just what you're looking for. Interlaced is for like web images and stuff like that, and handles the way that they load on our web browser, but you don't have to worry about that today, or for video content really. So we have our lower third saved out.
One quick question there.
If you did save that as a JPEG, would that create a box of like?
Yeah, it would fill in the space with white.
Yeah, it would fill in the space with a white background, and so it would kind of be fading over. Yep.
This is kind of going back, but when do you want to use raster versus vector?
So the reason we did the logo today in a vector format was because it can scale to any size and be reused really easily. Say we wanted to make posters for our show, we could just grab our vector our vector logo and scale it to whatever size we need there without it being distorted. A lot of the time, raster images are used for when you know that you don't have to rescale things. You can definitely do a lower third or something like this in Illustrator, and it will work just as well. But we just wanted to introduce Photoshop as well today, so that's why we went with this. It basically just depends on what format suits your needs for the job better, basically, whether you want pixel level control or whether you want like some scalable like shape type control. There are shape tools you can work with in Photoshop as well if that's what suits you, but it's just basically like the type of control you need for it. All right, so we saved out our lower third. Now we're saving out our watermark. ST watermark. And we're going to save this one. It could be something other than a PNG if you wanted it to be, but I generally almost always use PNGs unless I have a reason not to. Personal.
Since there's only two colors, technically we could use this one as a GIF, but it's not really worth all the extra confusion. So we'll just do them both as PNG.
Okay, so now we've saved out our lower third, we've saved out our watermark, we have our vector format version of our logo. So it's time to start bringing these into our video project.
Go for it.
So we have a Premiere project loaded over here with basically a short clip of me talking about space. And we have a few bins created down in, I don't know if you guys can see that, a few bins created down in our project here. We have one for assets, which is where we're going to bring in the things that we just made, those PNGs. We have, we have a source folder, which is going to be our source footage, and then we have our sequence bin. So we talked a little bit about organizing your file structure last week in Premiere. Always just good to keep yourself nice and organized and have things labeled well and correctly. So we are going to bring our new graphics into this project. So we have our lower third and our watermark. Let's bring those into assets. All right, and now we are good to start using these. So our watermark is going to stay basically always on the screen in the bottom left corner there. So we can just put that right at the start and extend its duration all the way to the end of this clip. And then, since a hard watermark like that doesn't really look good, and it isn't really the purpose of a watermark per se, we're just going to double click on this in our timeline in order to bring up this clip in the source monitor. We'll go over to the Effect Controls tab, select Motion, and we can just, or sorry, not Motion, Opacity. It's not under Motion. And that'll let us just tone this down so that it's slightly transparent. So let's say 25, 30%, 30% I guess we're doing.
I like it.
So that's just, it's not going to get in the way as much. You can kind of see through it so that it's not disrupting the shot, but it is also there for visibility and all that kind of stuff. And then we are going to bring in our lower third next. So usually lower thirds are going to come up right when a new person is introduced in a shot. Stay up long enough to read the titles and everything like that, but without coming too close to the end of the clip. So let's see, we can, if I'm starting talking at 0, 0 right here in the timestamp, I could bring it in around 2 seconds maybe. Would be a good place to start our lower third. We want it to be long enough to read the title that's going to be up there, so let's say we want to make it it's a default length of 5 seconds. I think that's probably enough time in this case to read David Dorsey, Space Expert. But we can, let's see, we can go over to our Effects tab down here. And we talked about doing transitions a little bit last week. And so that's what we're going to do in this case. So if we go to Video Transitions, Dissolve, Cross Dissolve, we're just going to throw one of those on each end of this lower third. And now if we play this back, we see that it basically fades in on top of the logo. So it's kind of a smooth way of it entering and then going back to the watermark. So that basically handles us here. We talked about creating titles in Premiere last week, so we could go in and create our title to put my name and information actually there, and then fade those. Might have to play around with the timing a little bit because the fades do affect the visibility of how long basically you can see them on screen. But we went over titles last week, so I guess you don't really have to do that right now. I guess we can open it up to questions. People have anything they wanted to know, got lost anywhere along the way, need a hand with anything like that. Okay.
I have a question. Is there any way to like make the lower thirds like move into it instead of like dissolve in, just like move the side into it?
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. There's a few different ways you can do it. You could, for example, do a crop, put a crop effect on this, start it with it fully cropped off, and then set keyframes to animate wiping over. So I can show you guys doing that. So if we were to take off
questions while I start that up.
Sure. Take off the cross dissolves. We're just going to search crop. Good. Throw that on here. So we see this is it when we double clicked on our graphic in timeline. We can go in the source monitor over to the effects controls tab in order to see the values that we're allowed to edit with this crop effect. So if we were to crop it from the right, that would basically be bringing it in this way. So if we were to put it at 100%, we didn't talk about keyframing last week, did we?
No, we didn't.
All right, so we're going to go over something really quick called keyframing. It basically allows you to set different values over time for your effects or things like that. And then it will fill in the gaps in between them to kind of bridge that difference.
It's a pretty standard concept that crosses many different platforms. So if anybody ever says keyframes, it's
It's pretty standard.
So if we go to the very start of our clip here, we want to create our first keyframe where we're setting the value of the crop to be basically fully cropped off from the right. So we're going to click on this little stopwatch in the Effects Controls tab over here in order to create a keyframe. Now we see there's this blue circle right here, which will add or remove keyframes. We see a little, well, it's not a diamond right now because it's cut off, but it's a diamond over in this little timeline looking thing over here. If we were to click the stopwatch again, that's not going to create more keyframes. It's going to toggle whether or not there are keyframes on this. So if I were to turn that off, it's telling me that it's going to delete the existing keyframes, which is not what we want in this case. So that's just something to be careful of. We would then go forward however long we want our animation to be. Let's say I want it to take a second in order to move across. So we would just scrub forward on our timeline here. We can click this little diamond to add another keyframe, and then we would just change the value that we want to be edited over that time to 0%. So now if we scrub through here, we can see that over time, it's this percentage right here is just linearly going through from 100% down to 0%. And then to take it out, I would do the exact same thing. I would probably just go to the end of the clip here, and I would set another keyframe where this one would be 100% because that's where it was going to be fully out. And then I would go back a second. And I would set another keyframe at 0% because we didn't want it to start fading out until a second before the end of it. So now we have 4 keyframes on this crop right here. We have one where it's 100% cropped. We have a second one where it's down to 0% as it fully comes in. We have another keyframe 3 seconds later with the same value, which basically means the value's not going to be changing at all in that time, so it's kind of like a hold on animation. And then we have our last keyframe to end the transition. So if we were to watch this back now down here.
One thing about space is that there's just so much of it. It's just out there.
And that is our lower third. Any other questions?
I'd love to know about space.
Well, if you tune in next time.
Sure, guys.
Yeah.
So, you know how in After Effects there's that one thing, is it motion blur? Is that the name of it?
Yep.
Does Premiere have something like that?
I don't believe it has like the simple built-in motion blur that After Effects has. It's that little button you can click there, but I'm sure there are types of blurs and stuff in the effects. I'm sure you could definitely
just a setting.
find something for your needs.
I don't know of it in Premiere.
You'd have to animate a blur.
Yeah.
To really do it. It would just be better to do it.
Yeah, it definitely be better in this case.
It's just not
Why
capable.
we don't do it in Premiere usually.
Yep. So a lot of the time when we do lower thirds, we're going to want to have motion to go with them, and that kind of stuff is just way easier to do in After Effects or any sort of motion graphics software. Premiere wouldn't really be the place for it, but we'll have a whole separate meeting at some point about doing things in After Effects, and we can maybe go over like a similar kind of situation then. Anybody want to learn anything else? Feedback?
Anybody have any projects that they want some feedback on?
That kind of feedback. Yeah, if you guys have any like work you're doing for production classes throughout the semester and you want to show us stuff, ask questions.
I have like an After Effects question. It might
Okay.
be really simple, but I don't have like some. I just want to know like the best way you guys would do something like achieving After Effects.
Yeah, sure. We can take a look as a whole group if you'd like. This
Sure.
kind of concludes our thing on doing graphics in
And I think
Photoshop and
before we
Illustrator.
start with that, I want to kind of get a poll from the group, kind of what the general feel is, what we should do next week, or if there are some other ideas.
So we're not going to meet next weekend because it's holidays coming up, Jewish holidays. So we were going to meet on a Thursday night in a week and a half.
So Thursday the 28th.
At around 9 p.m. So some options we had, maybe each person can kind of explain it. Dante, you could possibly do an audio thing in Premiere, possibly Premiere to Pro Tools to Premiere, or just audio in Premiere. I guess,
Yeah.
do you want to talk about that for a sec, what you could do?
I could show the very basic general workflow for exporting to Pro Tools and then explain the certain like file formats and why they're used and what they're used for to get the Pro Tools. And if you'd like, I can also go over.
But if that's too advanced, then
honestly, that's like the easiest thing I could probably do. I mean, unless you guys
there could be
actually
audio
want to
in
learn.
Premiere too.
I'm not really well knowledgeable on audio in Premiere except for